I mean, I don't want people to get angry with me. I'm not a fan of Zelensky. Like I mentioned, we discussed yesterday, I'm no fan of Vlad versus Vlad. I really don't care.
I love that. That was classic. It was like Vladimir versus Vladimir.
Yeah, like I just, whatever. But I think people, sometimes it's important to try to be charitable to the other side, just to understand what they're getting at.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up watching. I mean, we talked about it yesterday. It was hysterical. And, I don't think JD actually had any good talking points, to be honest. I don't think he was persuasive. But it was very interesting once you watch the entire thing. And strategically, I think it was either an awful disaster, what Zelensky did, or it was very smart. And I haven't decided yet. I don't know which one it is. He brought up something that I didn't know. I had no idea. I'm going to take him at his word. I'm assuming he's being truthful about this. And I think it would fit the pattern of behavior of Putin, which was, he said, we've already had 15 ceasefires, and he's violated them all. So another ceasefire without a security guarantee is not going to do anything. It's just going to be, he's just going to violate the ceasefire like he did before. And I thought, oh, okay. So from their perspective, which I don't really agree, I'm America first on this issue. We want the fighting to start, and we want America to benefit. Okay. But from their perspective, he's thinking, if I'm going to give you access to all these minerals because you want it to pay back the investment you made in our country for the war, then I want a security guarantee. Because if I don't get that, what I'm going to end up with is a meaningless ceasefire that won't be a ceasefire and loss of control over my minerals. Mm-hmm. Then I have nothing.
Yeah.
So as much as he may not have a lot of leverage now, the only leverage he has is the fact that the U.S. wants access to their rare earth minerals. So is the U.S. just trying to kind of swindle him out of control of the rare earth minerals? And then, well, if Ukraine falls or if the war continues, if the Russians violate their ceasefire agreement, then that's their problem. Maybe that's where they're at. What the fuck is this?
The fuck is going on?
Another warrant. There we go.
Welcome back to another episode of the Runway Pond, where we talk about current events, politics, Web3, technology, and more. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, BJ Dichter, the author of Honking for Freedom and the leader of the Canadian trucker convoy. Welcome, my friend.
Good morning, sir. It's good to see you again.
Yeah. Been seeing you a lot these past couple days. I like it.
It's been great to be here. The weather is beautiful. And I spent about 5 minutes just watching the planes land.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Before I came up here, it was absolutely brilliant.
Awesome. Paul, why don't you kick us off with some of the Zelensky drama that's been pervading the news feeds. BJ's got some interesting takes here.
Mr. Tracksuit.
So it looks like there's an update from Nick Sorter here. Zelensky is leaving the United States empty-handed after disrespecting our country in the Oval Office and refusing to apologize to President Trump. Dude's going home with a no mineral deal, no peace deal, and a tanking approval rating. Farewell to the biggest grifter in history. Well, that's one way to look at it. BJ, do you have another take here on this whole situation?
I mean, I don't want people to get angry with me. I'm not a fan of Zelensky. Like I mentioned, we discussed yesterday, I'm no fan of Vlad versus Vlad. I really don't care.
I love that. That was classic. It was like Vladimir versus Vladimir.
Yeah, like I just, whatever. But I think people, sometimes it's important to try to be charitable to the other side, just to understand what they're getting at. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up watching. I mean, we talked about it yesterday. It was hysterical. And, I don't think JD actually had any good talking points, to be honest. I don't think he was persuasive. But it was very interesting once you watch the entire thing. And strategically, I think it was either an awful disaster what Zelensky did, or it was very smart, and I haven't decided yet. I don't know which one it is. He brought up something that I didn't know. I had no idea. I'm going to take him at his word. I'm assuming he's being truthful about this, and I think it would fit the pattern of behavior of Putin, which was he said, "We've already had 15 ceasefires, and he's violated them all. So another ceasefire without a security guarantee is not going to do anything. It's just going to be he's just going to violate the ceasefire like he did before." And I thought, oh, okay. So from their perspective, which I don't really agree, I'm America first on this issue. We want the fighting to start, and we want America to benefit. Okay. But from their perspective, he's thinking, if I'm going to give you access to all these minerals because you want it to pay back the investment you made in our country for the war, then I want a security guarantee. Because if I don't get that, what I'm going to end up with is a meaningless ceasefire that won't be a ceasefire and loss of control over my minerals. Then I have nothing.
Yeah.
So as much as he may not have a lot of leverage now, the only leverage he has is the fact that the U.S. wants access to their rare earth minerals. So is the U.S. just trying to kind of swindle him out of control of the rare earth minerals? And then, well, if Ukraine falls or if the war continues, if the Russians violate their ceasefire agreement, then that's their problem. Maybe that's where they're at. What the fuck is this?
The fuck is going on?
Another warrant. There we go.
Are they coming after us?
Stand up against the wall, sir.
You got all my seed phrases. Come on, what do you want?
Oh, this is classic. Well, we didn't expect this. We didn't expect to get raided in the middle of our podcast. But
this is so America.
Surprised.
I love it.
Welcome to America, my friend.
I'll wait outside for you.
Yeah, I'm waiting for. I don't see the 6-shooter though.
I left it in the car. I thought we could show this gentleman. Like, in Canada, we try to be nice.
In Canada, we have firearms licenses, but no firearms.
Yeah. 12 months to get or 24 months to get approved for a firearms license, but you're not allowed to buy a firearm. It's kind of like It's kind of like we didn't force you to get vaccinated, but you just can't do anything for 3 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy.
Put your hands behind your back.
I'm not into this. I like women. Who's telling him that's not the case?
Bitcoin Ben put him up to this.
Oh, did he?
I'll be outside.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's classic.
Brilliant. Yeah.
I really thought we were getting swatted. Oh my goodness. I got all sorts of characters around here. You'll get to know them all better.
I see that. I guess I'm gonna have to come back to Naples sometime soon.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I think that, again, I'm not saying I agree with the perspective that I'm putting forward. I'm just saying it's important to try to look at the other side's perspective and understand what they're getting at. And so look at it this way: if you're in Zelensky's position right now, who, again, I don't like Vladimir versus Vladimir. I don't care. Okay. So that's why maybe because I'm not emotionally tied to, I have to hate team yellow and blue versus team, blue, red, white, whatever the Russian flag is now. So I don't have the emotional tie to either of them. So I don't trust either of them. Right. But if you're in Zelensky's, if you're in his position and you're thinking, okay, well, the U.S. is basically, this is not my opinion. This is what I think he's thinking. I think he's thinking, if they're going to strongman me into giving up my minerals, and then I have to go in and sign this contract or I get nothing, and they're going to do it as a press event in front of the whole world, well, maybe that's going to be my opportunity to push back and say, no, you're not giving us security guarantees. And by the way, nobody knows Vladimir Putin keeps violating the ceasefires. And if maybe that was the one thing he wanted to get out, so everybody understands.
Yeah.
Everybody on the right understands the complexity is way more so than we're being told. If that's what he was trying to do, then I think he may have succeeded. And I think also with Trump, you know, the criticism he always gets is that he's transactional, that he'll do a deal with anybody. He'll do a deal with, you know, King Jong-un and stuff like that. But that also, that weakness that they say, I think is his biggest strength. So, and maybe Zelensky knows that and knows he can go and, you know, disrupt this meeting, and they may get angry, but at the end of the day, Trump is transactional, wants to do a deal, and maybe we'll talk again privately after a few days. Maybe, you know, the waters will calm, and we'll be able to talk about the security guarantees as well. Again, I don't agree. I'm not saying I agree with this position.
No.
You're trying to understand.
I think this is beautiful. I love to hear this.
Yeah.
My questions are, you know, if we give them a security guarantee, I feel like that's exactly what Russia doesn't want, is like our troops there or whatever kind of security.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's just kind of like a non-starter. And I feel like the economic partnership, I guess, you know, a way for us to get paid back for everything we've invested there, that to me feels like the security guarantee, because, you know, Trump can go to Putin and say, hey, look, like, we just want to get our money back. Like, we've got a business venture here. Like, this is not a militarized situation. Like, let us make our money. I feel like he's speaking the language that, you know, they'll understand, right? Like, that Putin would agree with and say, okay, I see NATO's not expanding. I see you don't want to militarize it. It's an economic thing. It's business. It's investment. I feel like he's probably more okay with that, and that's more reasonable. And that would open the key to a better dialogue between the world superpowers to say, hey, let's compete economically. Let's have the economic partnerships, opportunities, business, make both countries better, etc. And I feel like that's kind of what Trump's going for, which makes a lot of sense to me.
Agreed. I agree. I mean, that's the American framing that I would be on board with. Again, I'm just trying to argue what the other side might be thinking, but I could be completely wrong.
No, I think right? I think that's exactly what's being thought.
And maybe the follow-up call is going to be Trump saying, I'm not giving a security guarantee with American troops in the Ukraine. And maybe he's going to say, okay, then who can you get to give us a security guarantee? I didn't say it has to be Americans. Maybe there's a coalition of European countries that, you know, right now are treating you poorly, but maybe we can do a deal and we can get a coalition, almost like a peacekeeping mission from the United Nations or NATO, that they can offer the security guarantee. You know, like there's many ways to splice it. This is a very complex deal, and I think it's very common. Anybody who's done very, very big deals in their lives or been witnessed them, it's very common for people to walk away from a deal multiple times until they put something substantive together. So if he was in, you know, the weaker negotiating position, if he had anticipated that, or that was his framing, and he wanted to get some, you know, negotiating leverage, what he did is the only thing he could have done.
Yeah.
That was his only remaining move. And what will happen on the Trump? Will the Trump administration come back to him and say, okay, what can we do? Or will they say, all right, it's time for elections, go ahead. And I remember hearing Trump saying, maybe, this is so trolling, maybe Ukraine should have elections, right? And it was very disappointing that the Americans, you know, endorsed the fact that they canceled elections. However, I didn't realize this till I started going down the rabbit hole. There's never been a Western nation that was at war that had elections during the war,
except for the United States.
Except for the United States.
But yeah, that's very common in Europe where they don't do that. So that's the standard over there. So like
that's right.
Insinuating anything different is to be ignorant of history, because that is how they have historically handled the world wars. That there are not elections during those world wars in those European countries. Now the United States is an exception, but we also changed our norms. I think during World War II, where we had the same president. He went four terms, right? So that had never really happened before, as far as I can recall.
That's why the Constitution was amended.
The Constitution was actually amended after that to only make it so it could be limited by 2 terms. So it was kind of the norm beforehand of like, because George Washington, I guess, had only ran for 2 terms, and then he had stepped away and said, look, I don't want this to be, you know, a forever job, right? It's kind of like, let's pass the buck, let's pass it on to the next person.
That's right.
To be the leader. Which
And then
was,
some countries take it too far, like
yeah,
like Mexico, where it's one term, or El Salvador is or was whatever it is, where it's supposed to be one term. I think that's taking it too far,
Mhm.
right? Because then it just becomes a
hard to do.
yo-yo. Every 4 or 5 years, everything
Yeah.
completely changes.
Yeah,
That's not sustainable either.
No, I think 2 terms. Personally, could run for 2 terms. I think that's a solid period of time to put policies in place, and you have 4 years. And if that's popular, you can get another 4 years of that. And then if that's still popular, you can reelect somebody else within the same party potentially.
I
To
think
continue that.
I think it's one of those things too that I love these debates where you can actually argue both sides.
Mhm.
And having met you call them legislators here, but having met parliamentarians and lawmakers in Canada and gotten to know quite a few of them, some of them there are some that actually get in because they're really passionate and they care about the country, and I'm not going to say they're few and far between, but they're kind of the rare gems
Mhm.
in politics. And I can see the frustration with some of them when they want to do something that will fundamentally benefit the country over the long term.
Mhm.
It requires, a generation versus worth of change that
Mhm.
we need. But they look at and they say, "Well, I'm going to be out of office in the next 4 years," and I think that's kind of what feeds the short term thinking
Mhm.
among the political class, is the fact that in certain offices where there are terms, it kind of fuels the short-term thinking, which is
Mhm.
a big part of the problem in Western countries. So I can argue
Yeah.
both sides of this,
No doubt. No, there's
and I
definitely.
don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's just it depends on the context of the situation.
Yeah, no, I think you're perfectly right. Paul's got a take here pulled up from Tucker Carlson. One of the most striking things about yesterday's Zelensky press conference was Lindsey Graham's reaction to it. The two are old friends, but Graham disavowed him within the hour. This was more than just transactional disloyalty, it was scapegoating. Lindsey Graham knows what's coming. Over the past 3 years, with the tacit support of its Western patrons, the Ukrainian government has committed a remarkable number of serious crimes. The Ukrainians sold huge quantities of American weapons on the international black market at 20 cents on the dollar. These weapons are now in the hands of armed groups around the world, including Hamas, the Mexican drug cartels, and the forces now controlling Syria. God knows what the Ukrainians have done with the pathogens in American biolabs in their country. Even U.S. intel agencies aren't sure. The Ukrainians have also murdered a number of people in various countries in political assassinations and tried to murder others, including American journalists and a European head of state. This is all true, and it's all going to come out at some point. Better to start blaming it on Zelensky now. What do you think about that?
I'm skeptical.
Truth, lies, fiction.
I'm skeptical. I think that's
What parts are you skeptical about?
it's what Scott Adams, I think, coins too on the nose.
Mm-hmm.
That's too perfect. That's what we all want it to be.
Uh-huh.
I think there's a lot of complexity. I brought that up with some people I know who are on the geopolitical scenes. And I brought this up about 6 months ago because I heard this rumor that Zelensky had been sending weapons to Hamas. And this person was in political intel for many years. Not
I mean, sending is one thing, but the grift for sure is happening. I mean, they're
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm
like,
not disagreeing. Again, I'm not.
It's like I sell it to Paul over there, and Paul sells it to Tommy, and then all of a sudden Hamas now has it, and Muhammad has
for
it.
sure,
You
for
know,
sure.
Like I don't
For
think it's so like, oh, he just sent it to Hamas and sold it. I think that we're seeing it with like USAID and all the stuff that's being exposed.
For
So
sure.
much money is like going to like, I think like it's all going to one political party to fund you know what I mean? Like taxpayers are paying to fund all these propaganda for the left. That's really what we've seen. But I
Yeah.
think it's similar stuff is happening here, but maybe not as exact as that, like you said.
Well, that's my point. That I think he may be. There's likely some truth to that, but I think it might be a little bit too on the nose, a little bit too, like, you can tell that's a persuasion message. That's what Tucker Carlson does. He's a persuader, and he tries to persuade people into certain positions. He's very skilled at that. And I think that's what that is, but I think there's probably a lot more complexity to that. And, we'll see. We'll see. I mean,
I guess we will.
what would be really great would be some evidence along with that tweet. documents, flow charts, something
Like the
from Intel.
small data Republican. She's fantastic. I would love to see that.
Yeah, exactly.
She's got these flow charts that show these organizations and all the aid, and hey, this politician's voting on this, and like, hey, this guy, this judge who's blocking the aid, that's his wife is getting $5 million from this person.
That's right.
I mean, I love that. It's
There's
just, like,
another
fantastic.
account, Insurrection Barbie.
Yeah, she's great too.
She's brilliant.
Oh,
It's
fantastic.
so yeah. I mean, I'd like to see something substantive to go along with it.
Yeah, some
Those
actual
two
some
accounts
evidence.
too.
Yeah, because you get
Yeah.
these conspiracies, and then it's like, you don't actually see the evidence. You just accept this as fact and
That's
build
right.
on this next thing and build on this next thing. And at some point, you're 5 steps down the road, and you're like, wait, we haven't even proved the first thing, and you're drawing conclusions to the second, the third, the fourth,
Yeah.
and the fifth.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
this is really shaky. The second thing is there's really shaky evidence here, maybe, but maybe not. So yeah, I get what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
and the
But
thing-
no doubt that grift is occurring. I mean, that's part.
Oh
of
no,
it.
for sure. I think we all know
That's
that.
part of the Vladimir versus Vladimir culture. I mean, like,
Yeah.
10% for the big guy is even part of the American culture, right? Or what
I-
is it, 10%, 20% for the big guy? I can't remember.
I remember I said
Yeah.
I posted recently that 80% of politics is money laundering all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly.
That's literally exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
Exactly what's happening here.
And this case is not unique.
Mhm.
This is the same everywhere. And I think
Mm.
also that at the end of the day, I mean, Russia invaded Ukraine. Yes, was Putin antagonized? Did the Americans violate the agreement to not expand NATO to the 7 countries that they expanded
Yeah.
to? Yes, they did.
Mm.
But Russia invaded Ukraine.
No doubt. I mean, they literally did.
So
They
that's
pulled
why
things across the floor.
Vladimir versus
Yeah,
Vladimir.
they got violent. I mean, like
There's a very famous quote.
you could only gaslight so much. Russia literally rolled troops across the border and started the special military operation. Now,
Yeah.
we both agreed and think that they thought it was going to be a real quick thing, and they thought that because I was talking to Russian friends and that are just normal people that all and they're just like, yeah, we're gonna roll in 2 days, and Kiev's
yeah.
gonna surrender, and I'm hearing these
Yeah.
delusional takes. I'm like, you guys, I'm like, you're fucking delusional. Like, that is not what's happening here. And like later on, they're like, oh fuck, that was the dumbest thing I ever said.
There's a very famous quote. I don't remember the exact political incident. It was from Ben Gurion, who was the prime minister of Israel at that time, and it had something to do, if I remember correctly, I don't know, insurgency, PLO or whatever. That they, one group was fighting with another group, and he said, "I hope they both win." It's the same thing. God bless them all. I hope they both win.
No, it was the People's I know exactly what you're talking
Yeah,
about. So,
PLO.
and this is what's so complicated about the whole Israel-Palestine thing is that you got the PLO and you had like Hamas, and they actually at one point were at like people think like, oh, it's Palestine, but like no, at one point like the People's Liberation Army, like this sect of Palestinians were literally at war with Hamas or whatever this sect of Palestinians, and maybe it wasn't Hamas, it was some other group, but it was like there was like a full-scale war going on. Like they both hate Israel, but now they're fighting each other in a full scale. It's just chaos, total chaos.
I think I've always noticed that in the Bitcoin crypto space, the amount of misunderstanding in that part of the world is just shocking.
Yeah.
So I tend not to get into the conversations about it.
Yeah.
But I think like I tried to show people during the Freedom Convoy, I tried to show them that the news is fake.
Mhm.
It's always been fake.
Yeah.
And so much of the framing that people have around the Middle East and around Israel is completely fake.
Yeah.
It's they bought. It's that, remember Gell-Mann's amnesia.
Yeah.
When they read something on Bitcoin, they know it's complete nonsense. But then they read something about Israel and the Arabs, and they believe that.
Yeah.
And like, it's all fake.
It's just people have no idea what they're writing. They're just hey, I got to meet this deadline. I'm just going to use put some bullshit out. I mean, that's pretty much what I gathered from a lot of the stuff.
And the way I just try to simply communicate it to people who don't, and say, you can start digging now and start understanding it. Just that is the front lines between Western values and theocratic collectivism. That's what's on the other side. So if you're on the side of theocratic collectivism, I'm sorry, you're not a Bitcoiner. But if you're on the side of Western individualism, then you should be on the other side. But people don't understand that.
Yeah.
Because they don't understand the conflict. So,
I think I talked to Saifuddin on X at some point. He recommended a couple books, and I think one of the books was 100 Years War on Palestine. And I read the book, and I'm trying to understand the other side, right? The Palestinian argument on all this. And I really went down that rabbit hole. And I think there are, of course, legitimate grievances there. But the conclusion I came out to was like, it's complete chaos. That that area was part of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire lost World War I. which is how wars go. Like we're seeing with
Mhm.
Ukraine and fucking Russia right now. It's like when you lose a war, like you lose that land, and like it's not like there was a like Palestine was a place.
That's
It was
right.
like part of the Ottoman Empire. Like
That's
there's a
right.
portion of it, like all these other countries that were there, right?
Yeah.
Like you were part of an empire that was conquered and ruled, and you lost. And the victors of the war, like had been through all of human history, they win the land and they decide what happens with it, right? So you might not like what happened with it, but that's what the victors of the war decided at the time,
Mhm.
right? So,
Yeah.
you know, I just the main argument that I found credible from their side, despite all of the crazy chaos and all the terrorism stuff and the craziness,
Yeah.
people being displaced from private property like land, like Israeli settlers or whatever, essentially a big portion of it, they left the land, they abandoned it. So that was
Yeah.
like, hey, you left the land. Like you can't come back 20 years later and say, hey, now this is my land again. Like, no, you abandoned it, you left. But there are some portions of area where private property rights were essentially taken over by Israel. And I think that was wrong. I believe that, hey, you could be the new nation that owns this, but don't take away, these Palestinian farmers or whatever their property and their land. So I think that's where like I agree with it. But at writ large, I mean, you know, I probably lean towards the Israeli side of things more so than the Palestinian side. Even after reading that book and hearing, and of course, horrible atrocities committed on both sides and war and all this stuff. But when a war happens and you get conquered by another nation and they kind of like split up and decide. I mean, America, same thing. We took over America and there was different tribes. And before the Americans were there was vicious tribes killing each other, these different Indians.
Oh,
that were
yeah.
here. I mean, it's like cutting people's heads off, scalping them. Like, if you look at history, it's like these different territories, they just kept changing, right? Because, war happens and that's just, sadly, that's the way human history has always gone, right? It's like,
Yeah, or in or in cucked places like Canada, where we have land acknowledgements all the time for native cultures that didn't believe in property. Property rights is that
It's very
comes
Western
from the
thing.
Columbian Exchange.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as property rights. There's no such thing as property.
Yeah.
And you had warring tribal nomadic nations that were all killing each other. So we have in Canada, this was the Mississauga New Credit Land. Oh yeah, was that after they killed the Iroquois and genocided them?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's absurd.
It's so weird.
At some point, you can just go back in history through so much time, but we are where we are today, and at this point, this is where we are. We got to deal with what we have, right? This is the reality, and that's kind of the argument for the people that many of us who elected Trump to be the president, right? Is like, let's be in reality. The reality is, Russia may have taken some of that land. Like, we're not going to go to World War III because they took the land. Like, we don't want that, right? Like, they took the land. You didn't have the capability to defend yourself at the time. I think there should be a wake-up call for those nations in the region. Like, arm yourselves, be able to provide for your own defense, like be self-sufficient, be self-sovereign.
And the big common denominator, if you're dealing with people who philosophically have a Western frame, which is often the problem in the Middle East, but I think Dubai and Saudi Arabia and other countries are fixing that. But if you have a Western frame, then peace comes through economic opportunity.
Exactly.
And engaging in commerce with each other. And that's a globalist frame, by the way. That's where the globalists, kind of started from, I guess. And they just, like, anything in excess is bad, right? And that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
The European Union was supposed to be an economic agreement. And now it's become a tool to use for political censorship. Well, that's not what the goal of the European Union was.
Yeah.
So perhaps if they went back to that and got rid of all the communists and the people who are appointed and not elected, then maybe Europe can rediscover some normalcy as opposed to what is going through right now, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Paul, can you pull up the take I had about, just so I could frame, because I wanted to, I think it was a recent take I recorded from 3.5. Let's see. No, go down a little bit. It was about...
And by the way, everybody who's listening, much respect for Paul. He edits in real time.
That is amazing. Yeah.
It is amazing. So give him a give us a like just because of that. Thanks, Paul.
Keep it coming. Keep it coming.
I think what I flagged was about, it was kind of just explained the frame of how Russia views what's happening on their border. It was. Can you refresh that? I think it was a recent. I did it right before we hopped on, Paul. So I don't know if it was a recent tag I did. Here it is. Glenn Greenwald. Fantastic take here. So he kind of describes like putting yourself, steel manning and putting yourself in Russia's position on what's happening with Ukraine on their border, right?
Mhm.
So I'm sure the US would have been fine if China had been micromanaging Mexico for years after helping violently remove Mexico's elected leader and replacing him with one more pro China and anti US, then moving to put Mexico in a China led military alliance. DC, no problem. So it kind of just talks about maybe like put yourself in the other shoes and at least try to, yes, they were the ones who initiated the violence. Yes, they did invade the other country. There's no doubt about that. You can't whitewash and change history. That did happen. They are the aggressors in the scenario. But there's a rationale for that behavior if you're able to enter their frame of mind, right? So they are a country that's been invaded. If you understand their history, they're a country that's been invaded. I mean, World War II, Hitler went to take over their country. I mean, so they've got a different mindset when it comes to these things. There's not an ocean separating them from
Yeah,
other superpowers.
geographically, it's a very easy
Yeah.
country to invade.
Exactly.
Which is why they've invested so much in security. And
Exactly.
like I remember I was talking to one of our former ministers who was very concerned about Russia for many years, worked with a lot of Russian dissidents, anti-Putin people. We're going back like 10, 15 years. And, he always, he tried to communicate to people that, Russia their economy is 1/4 the size of Canada's.
Mm.
It's a very large landmass, but very sparsely populated. There's a couple of cities, and most of it is just Siberian permafrost, sort of thing, similar to Canada.
Mhm.
And they're really kind of a barfly. And if they didn't have the threat of nuclear weapons, which my guess is they're as reliable as a ladder, but
Yeah.
who knows? And they're 1/4 the size of Canada, but their economy, approximately, I can't remember exactly the numbers, but they invest 4 times more money
Mhm.
in defense than X number of countries. So all their money is going to nuclear subs and all that sort of stuff, but it is a tiny economy.
Yeah.
And it's just very interesting that it's that one, threat of that one technology that's given them a lot of influence in the world stage.
Mhm.
And they do spend, he was walking me through how they try to persuade, influence, brainwash people on a global scale. And many countries do that.
Of course.
But they're,
Like what we've been doing.
that's right. But they're actually good at it, which is what they're worried about.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
they're actually effective.
Well,
with it.
look how effective we've been. I mean, look at all this crazy propaganda. People believe in it. I mean, it was like 51%, 49% election. And
Yeah.
we're getting pretty fucking good at it too, from what I've been seeing.
Yeah.
Aside from all these left-wing radical networks and different things. And
Well, I think what's different is, look, we are all, I'm going to use this term hyperbolically,
Mhm.
but I understand. I mean what I say, but not quite as extreme. But for entertainment, I'll be hyperbolic. We are all brainwashed.
Mhm.
Most of us are a compilation of the 5 opinions we hear most frequently, and the 5 people we spend most of our time with. But there's good brainwashing and bad brainwashing. So I think if you're an American and you're brainwashed into the pro-America, pro-freedom, pro-respect for all people and mankind, that is a good form of brainwashing.
Yeah.
But then there's the bad kind of brainwashing, and that's really where the problem lies.
Mhm.
And people still don't. People think that we're coming up with ideas on our own, and it's not. It's the environment around us that allows us to shape how we view the world.
Mhm.
And I have this conversation with people more frequently lately, that people's their ability to see the world has blind spots. We have blind
For
spots
sure.
on the right, and I'm trying to get people to understand that it's not your opposition that brainwashes you. It's the people on your side who are lying to you. That's who's brainwashing you. And maybe that's why I tend to be more skeptical
Mhm.
of people on the right. Not because I don't like them, not because I don't like what they're saying or I disagree, But I know that's where
your
the
blind spot,
brainwashing
yeah.
is going to come from. If I'm going to develop a a blind spot, it's going to come from them.
From your own team or for the people that
Yeah.
you more likely agree with on a lot of issues. Yeah.
That's right. That's also why you have the most heated debates with people who are on your side, because you're like, we agree on everything, man. How can we not agree on this one thing? Why can't you just see it? You know, and we get frustrated.
Yeah.
Your opposition's completely crazy, so you dismiss it, so you don't get emotionally as tied to it, sort of thing. And I do like this idea. At least I've seen it, and this is what I was using during the Freedom Convoy. Some of the tactics of communication that I learned over the many years. That people don't make rational decisions. None of us do. That we all post-rationalize. This is something you learn. They learn in hypnosis. Scott Adams talks about it. Robert Cialdini talked about it. Like, this is not a new concept for people to understand.
So you're saying you make a decision and then you try to post-justify it. That's kind of
we all post-rationalize our decisions. And the more we think we don't make emotional decisions, the more we are making.
Yeah, I mean, humans are creatures that are controlled by our limbic systems, which is like our emotional brain, right? That's like the most primitive brain that you have.
That's right. That's why I far prefer a Corvette over a Toyota Corolla any day. Which one's the practical one? It ain't the Corvette, but that's the emotional tie.
Yeah.
But if I was going to go buy one, I have the emotional tie, and then I can rationalize why it's a better thing for me to.
Of course,
and we all do that. Girls do that with handbags. Oh, I need to have this Coach bag. What do you mean you need to? Well, they'll post rationalize. We all do that.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Paul, what do you got for us here? Scott Jennings sums it up perfectly on CNN with Laura Coates. You want to replay this clip real quick?
I don't know if he needs an apology. He needs Zelensky to recognize the position that he's in.
Which to you is what?
We're their patron. We're their best hope for the killing to stop and for them to emerge from this sovereign and prosperous. And we're also their best hope as a business partner. I mean, all Zelensky had to do today was put on a tie, show up, smile, say thank you, sign the papers, and have lunch. That's it. And he couldn't do that. And this followed 10 days of being difficult in private, and now 1 day of being stupid in public. This did not have to go down this way.
Okay.
And however you feel about why it started, why it's going on, who's right and who's wrong, we can help them in this and come out okay on the other side, and he's making it hard.
Now, first of all,
I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I actually agree with Scott.
I don't think I've ever seen this on CNN.
Basically right. Wow. I know. I'm going to get killed on social media for admitting that, but so be it.
You're not going to get killed, big guy. You're going to be...
it doesn't matter whether Vice President Vance planned it or just took the opportunity to bait Zelensky. Zelensky took the bait, okay? Yeah. And he shouldn't have. He made a mistake.
Yeah, that's so wild.
Yeah,
that Scott Jennings guy, he's fantastic.
He's great.
He's like their best commentator. I mean, he's so patient. He'll sit there with like five, they'll all be like yelling at him, and he'll just sit there calmly and just be very patient, be very cordial.
He's very smart.
He's very smart.
Scott was talking about him, and I posted on my Twitter feed. He said you can draw a direct line from the end of Trudeau's career and him resigning directly from the Freedom Convoy. And so he's very astute, because I agree with that. But I think also here, I agree with him. I understand. Like, I called a friend of mine.
But no, you had your interesting take, which I really appreciated. I thought that's missing right now. Well, I'm trying to understand why Zelensky did.
That's right. And I called a friend of mine who's very politically astute and swims in some high-level political circles, who I trust very much. And I called him. I'm like, so what do you, or I messaged him and said, what do you think? He says, he's a moron. All he had to do is sign the document and leave. That's all he had to do. And I'm like, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right. But, and again, I could be wrong. I'm just trying to find the most charitable explanation for his behavior. And that's what I could come up with. It might be wrong.
No, I think it's a good take, but I just think it underestimates the understanding of Donald J. Trump.
Oh yeah,
I think it discredits him in the way that, like, if Trump is making this deal with Putin, there's a reason Putin doesn't invade when Trump is the president. There's a reason Putin waits till he's got a demented person who comes out, and a president in Biden that comes out and says, "Oh, if they invade, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to get involved militarily." Like, I agree with that sentiment, but don't fucking put your cards on the table and say that. I mean, that was like I couldn't believe he actually said that. I'm like, wow.
But it was, you know what it was?
That statement is going to lead to the death of a million people, millions of people.
I know.
And sure enough, it
That's
did.
the problem.
All fucking Biden had to say was, if he crosses that border, we're gonna, just make some shit up, right? Even if you're not gonna do it, like, but Trump has that carrot, but he also has the stick. Where Trump is not afraid to press that button to launch fucking a bunch of missiles if to take somebody out or to do something, right? Like, he's got that badass in him. He's got that dog in him. And I think other leaders, whether they be dictators or whatever, especially particular dictators, like they have a healthy respect for that, right? Which is kind of like the Ronald Reagan effect, peace through strength. And I think Zelensky underestimated that in Trump, where like if Trump would have done this peace deal, maybe Trump's not going to be back in 4 years, but he could have said, "Hey, bro, you got 4 years to fucking shore up your defenses. I'm going to do the best I can for you." He's not going to.
Yeah.
Putin ain't crossing that line while I'm the goddamn president. You got 4 years. You better fucking get your nuclear program ready.
Yeah. But you know what it was?
That's what I would have done. I mean,
what it was very entertaining television.
Yeah, absolutely. Trump said that. He goes, "This is going to make great television."
You were watching The Apprentice in the White House.
Yeah.
Right. You're fired. Get out. That's all it was.
You're watching. You're literally watching history in real time, and there's a lot of things like this would have never happened in the prior administration. This would be total transparency. There wouldn't be any transparency. It'd be totally scripted. You'd have no idea what's going on.
Which is what we're all tired about.
We're tired of that shit. We want to see this. We want to see reality. We want to see real negotiations.
We can have conversations like this and try to work through them together.
Exactly, right? And think about it, and people can watch and make nuanced decisions. And I think that was beautiful to see.
Yeah,
it's like, hey, this is real. Like you just feel like, hey, these guys are actually fucking for real. Like they're real people. They're real negotiators. Like they're not hiding everything from the American people. There's no ulterior motive. It's, hey, we really want to end this fucking war. We want peace. And what I love about Trump is that he's willing to shake up the status quo of what everybody is boxed into this thinking of how like the world should work and geopolitical strategy. And we need to have a focus group on a focus group on a focus group. And maybe we'll make a decision in 8 years. He's like, no, like, let's fucking change things. Like, let's try to talk to people we've considered, foes. Let's try to, create an olive branch. Let's try to do business. Let's try to make the world a better place. I really like that thinking. I think it's why he was elected for sure. The majority of the American people want that and know that.
Yeah, and I think through transparent friction, the other side of that, you end up having nuanced discussions. It's very difficult to discuss nuance when all sides are just running a script and people are basically inferred what they should think.
Exactly.
But when you see the open friction, then that's what leads to us, well, let's understand everybody's perspective on what's going on,
Yeah. Interesting. Paul, do you have let's move along to another subject.
In terms of nuance, I thought this was interesting. Jeffrey Sachs just touches on this whole unprovoked.
Yeah, I mean, he shows how
some critical nuance.
Yeah. I mean, the nuance is that Putin didn't follow his end of the deal, but we didn't follow our end of the deal.
That's
either.
right.
So that's the fact, right? There's enough blame to go around on both sides, and the fact that this is happening in 2025 is fucking ridiculous. I think I have friends that live in Russia. I have friends that live that are Ukraine. I have friends all over the world, and like we all have a lot more in common, especially Western nations,
especially that part of Ukraine where everybody's ethnically Russian.
I mean, everybody, we all have a lot more in common than we think we think we do. That we don't like. You know what I mean? Like we're a lot more alike. We have a lot, very similar beliefs, and there are things we can disagree on, and there are things we do disagree on. But like, I think one of the big mistakes after the Soviet Union fell was the same mistake we made after World War I, which led to the rise of Hitler, where we instead of watching instead of putting the boot on the nation that lost, right? Instead of like saying like, hey, you're going to pay for all the costs of World War I, which is what we did we essentially did that with Germany. And like we saw hyperinflation occur and terrible, nationalism rise and the rise of Hitler. We essentially.
Isn't that what Trump's doing to the Ukraine?
I'm
just trying to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
When they're trying to do a deal where they get to exploit all the rare earth minerals from Ukraine.
Well, the logic is that it will create jobs and opportunities.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah,
more business
for America.
But well, what do you mean when you say for America?
It primarily will benefit America over the Ukraine, right? So what happens if I'm just trying to brainstorm this.
Okay,
right?
yeah, no,
Trying to
no, I hear what
devil's
you're saying. I
advocate.
mean, hopefully the deal would help both parties. It would employ Ukrainian workers, and it would create job opportunities for families. I mean, that's kind of the logic there. That's I guess that's what I'm
Unless
thinking
there's
there.
no security risk and they violate the
Yeah.
ceasefire agreement,
Mhm.
then, well, Ukraine's. I mean, it's everything I said before. Again,
Yeah.
I'm not. Again,
Yeah.
that's not my
Uh-huh.
opinion.
Uh-huh.
I'm just trying to.
But again,
give
we're
it
not
devil's
at
advocate.
we're not at war with Ukraine, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what I'm talking about is like when World War One was lost and won,
Yeah.
the losers of the war, like we're trying to negotiate a ceasefire here, like an end, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
but like the war was won and the war ended, and then all the countries who won
Yeah.
essentially said, "Hey, you're going to take the full cost of that war, and we're going to step on your throat, and you're going to pay it back to, like you got one country's got to pay 5 countries back for massive
Yeah,
costs."
yeah.
I mean, that is a
Yeah.
that's a whole nother level.
Yeah,
of
for
like,
sure, for sure.
Like you're not just paying back the cost for your own
You're paying everybody
like with
else's
Ukraine.
bills
Like
too,
Ukraine
yeah.
is paying back their own bills that they
Yeah.
did. Like what we did with after World War
Which
One
I think is
we
a
made Germany pay back everybody's bill.
Which I think, by the way, is a brilliant precedent
Uh-huh.
that if you're going to take money for us to fight your war,
Mhm.
then you're going to have to
Yeah.
pay us back with some of your assets.
Absolutely, it
I mean,
creates an
you talk
incentive for
about
peace.
an incentive to not go to war. That's
Exactly.
brilliant.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I love it. And, Ukraine should pay its own bill for its war. But like after World War One, Germany was like kind of like left holding the bag for everybody and had to pay back. And that really like what they did, they printed their money, they hyperinflated their
Mhm.
economy, they stole from their population.
Yeah.
They had the boot. People in Germany were very angry, they were upset. And it led to the rise of an environment that created Adolf
Mhm.
Hitler.
Yeah.
And I think I really strongly believe at the end of the Cold War, we made the same mistake with Russia. We basically, instead of saying,
Yeah,
hey,
I wouldn't disagree.
I would say, instead of saying, hey, like, let's bring you into part of the world. Let's include you as a partner, as an ally, as at least a part of the world order, instead of with antagonism.
And what's interesting is people in the West don't understand
They don't
the
understand.
mindset there, that people there like a strong man.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what it is with Asia,
Mhm.
but in Asian cultures, whether it's the Middle East or Russia,
They like a leader.
whatever,
They like a,
they want us, even if that strong man's going to oppress them, at least their strength.
yeah.
Which is a completely
Well,
different frame that we have in the West, right? And I think that comes from a shame-based society
Mm-hmm.
versus a guilt-based society, right? But
Trump has an appeal of a strongman as well, though. I mean, we put Trump in. He's got that kind of like counterpuncher. Do you feel like that's an equivalent? Like people like strength. People like real leaders. I feel like people gravitate towards leaders.
I think the bias in Asia is way more
Way
to
more.
a strong man,
Gotcha.
but we have in Western, Western philosophical frame, because we're all intellectuals, right? That's where you get kind of the weakness of people in, modern urban cultures
Mhm.
versus the divide with people in rural cultures, which is, those are people that build their life on, self-sustainability.
Mhm.
And they don't need the government. That it's funny how that's playing out all over the Western world, the divide between, urban versus rural. That you saw that with the Freedom Convoy,
Yeah.
right? Those were truckers predominantly from rural areas coming into the city because, the hell are you doing putting a bicycle lane on a highway 8 hours north of any city? What stupidity is this, right? So
Something only government could come up with.
that's right. So the urbanites in government that control anything have been completely
central planners,
ignoring. Yeah, they've been ignoring the needs of the rural communities,
Mhm.
which are completely different. It's a completely different set of needs.
Mhm.
And that is true in the United States, in Canada, in France, in England,
Yeah.
in Germany, all over the world.
That's a major problem with more centralized control
That's
of
right.
government, federal government, as opposed to local areas. People are much more willing. I'm much more happy about like paying my local taxes because I know it goes to I see what it buys, I see what it does. But like, look what's happening here. They're taking 30-something 5% of my fucking money. And
Yeah.
they're spending it on this fucking bullshit. These wars, these missiles, shooting fucking balloons out of the sky for $5 million. Like as the analogy I made is like, I think in another conversation we had was like, they spent fucking like $5 million on a missile that shot down a balloon that went all the way across the United States. They wait till it got to the sea. Spent a fucking $5 million missile. Probably a fighter jet had to go up there, burn a bunch of gas, do all this shit, be up there
Yeah.
and fucking shoot that out. It's like that $5 million. Like there's probably 100 people that worked their whole lifetimes to fucking pay that fucking for that one missile and for that one flight. You know what I mean? It's like such an insane waste of money. We see the USAID grift. That's just like the tip of the iceberg. I mean, they're probably sending all this money for Social Security checks to people who aren't even alive, Medicaid fraud, all this stuff that's happening.
Yeah, I love the people who are
So much
310
fraud.
years old.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, there's so much fraud happening. It's just unbelievable when you really see the level of it. Each little NGO, little scam, little grift scam they have, where it's like paying all their friends and family, and they're all on the boards getting paid, and then it's made to, like the Hillary Clinton thing, it's made to feed fucking children in Haiti like meals, and they provided like 300 meals at a cost of like thousands of dollars a meal, and like nothing actually really fucking happened. It was just a giant grift.
You know what happens when you get involved with the political class and you don't go along with the blatant corruption that everyone can see? You know what happens to you?
What?
They label you not a team player.
Yeah.
And that's when the whisper
You get Tulsi
campaigns
Gabbard
and the knives behind your back and
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, that's what happens.
Yeah.
So they all know that. And unfortunately, like, I don't know if that's just a product of the system that we have, or is it just the fact that government has been scaled to a point that it just starts to eat itself through corruption because government is just too big to be manageable at this point. I don't know if that's the reason, but I do know that when you're on the inside, that if you're willing to play ball with the lobbyists and the structure and let them kick you in the teeth and then say, oh, it's okay, do more, and you're very subservient and you're not an individual thinker. Like I did a long form podcast recently last week with Jim Carahalios, who is the leader of the New Blue Party in Ontario. He was supposed to be leader of the Conservative Party in Canada, but his entire political career, he was, somebody who would fight back, who wouldn't be the drone.
Yeah.
And he just got too high in the pecking order that they just disqualified him and kicked his wife out of politics, who was a member of parliament, because they were independent thinkers. And, he said, it was funny, he said in the interview, because he was an engineer before he was in politics and before he went to law school. He said, in engineering, the difference is you got to be able to tell the difference between right and wrong, right? That's not allowed in politics, so that's a big part of the problem. And I just don't know if it's systemic or if it's the type of people that are in it, but something needs to change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a natural state of things when power grows and festers for so long, and you just the breadth of the fraud, of the corruption, of the taking of just people's life savings, and they bust their ass and work, and you're taking and confiscating that wealth in so many different ways, whether it's the insidious tax of inflation, or it's the income tax, or all these little things that they do, right? And it's just gotten to the point where it's so ridiculous. And I talk about this on the series I just did with Dominic Frisby. It's like, if you were a serf in like 1,000 years ago, like you worked half the week for like whoever owned the land, like the plot of land. He's like, in a lot of nations, if you really add up all the costs today, like you're working around the same amount of time.
Exactly.
Whether it's property taxes and sales tax and estate tax and this tax and death tax and inflation tax. You're essentially, and one guy had a site where he published like how long of the year you work for the government, and like in some nations it's like from January to March, and then you get to the UK, it's like January to July or something like crazy. You know what I mean? So you just see this, and it's like half of your wealth is being confiscated to fund corruption, essentially. I mean, like. It's insane. It's honestly insane.
And it's like any large organization, and corporate structures are very similar when they get too big the same way. And my dad was a teacher, so I kind of always grew up seeing this on the education side, because he always managed the school budgets and stuff. That just this attitude grows. It's just like, it doesn't make sense, but that's the way we do it.
Yeah.
If we don't do it that way, then we're gonna get hassled. So just don't bother.
I remember talking to some military people at one point.
Similar things, right?
It's like, hey, we had $50,000 in our budget at the end, and if we don't spend it, we lose it. So we just ordered a bunch of bullshit, like just wasted all taxpayer money, and that was just like, hey, we got to spend this as quickly as possible, or else we'll lose the money next year for the budget or whatever. I mean, that kind of, those incentive structures are just so ripe for fraud and corruption.
Which is what Doge is doing.
I hope so. I hope they can solve all this stuff. I mean, it is just unbelievable, and I truly hope that Trump gets rid of the income tax. People talk a lot about tariffs and all this and that, but that's how the country worked for hundreds of years. And I think you can argue through its most successful eras, we were operating on a no income tax tariff based system, And, yes, tariffs are tax, of course. But if you can get rid of income tax, I think I would choose tariffs all day. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm trying to learn this whole. I've been watching a lot of content and reading content that's critical from the center, like not not political ideologues. The criticisms of the tariff model and versus the benefits and stuff.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like when during the blockchain wars,
Uh-huh.
Bitcoin versus
Yeah.
Bitcoin Cash, and I was in the Bitcoin for a year and a half. I'm like, I don't know. I really didn't know. Like, it's just I wasn't as well versed in Bitcoin enough at that point to determine which is the right direction. And I kind of feel the same way with the tariff model. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's better. Maybe it's not. Like, I really.
I think it'd be way better than income tax. Like,
listen, I got love. I have no love. We shouldn't have income tax, period. But
yeah.
I just, what's going to be the long term effects of it? Will it be more beneficial or not? Maybe. I'm not. I'm not in the position.
I think there are
to be able to say definitively yes or no because I don't know. So I'm looking to other people.
I like the idea of reciprocity with other nations. If they're tariffing our goods, we give them a reciprocal taste of their own medicine. So that to me makes a lot of sense. And the ultimate incentive for that is like, hey, you lower yours, I'll lower mine, and then boom, let's get to free trade. Like free trade is the optimal place we want to be, except when it comes to national security things. So I think there is some level of tariffs that for all countries makes sense in the sense of you want to be able to have a domestic, be able to the ability to make steel, to be able to make some of these things at home. So in case you get into war, there's ever a problem, you have some domestic capacity to protect yourself, whether it be food, whether it be weapons, whether it be ammunition or steel or building or whatever it may be. There's probably some level that makes sense where it does make sense for the government to come in because what should be their main job? Well, their main job should be security for the people, right? Like kind of security, and maybe they have very minor roles. One of those roles is security. And in order to have that security, this is why during the Civil War, or right before the Civil War, where after I think the War of 1812, the South actually they said, hey, look, we need to have tariffs on our own stuff because that really hurt the South. But the South said, we can't be in a situation like we were in just recently where we were under attack and we didn't have any domestic capacity, and our enemies were the ones who were selling us our weapons, and they embargoed us. Like we have to be able to make what we need to defend ourselves. So there's a level of argument there that I find very convincing.
Are you a car guy?
I am, yeah. Well, not a huge car guy, but I like myself a good car.
Okay, I'm a car guy. Stupid. I've always, since I was 3 years old, been obsessed with cars. In Colombia, a Toyota Camry is close to $100,000.
Wow.
Because there's 100% tariff on vehicles there.
Wow.
That's a tax.
No doubt.
That's a tax on citizens.
Massively.
Right? So I think, I hear all this stuff on tariffs and I agree, but then I go back to the experience of living in Latin America and see how certain foreign goods were massively tariffed to the point that it's one of the reasons you have such poverty there. People just can't afford certain goods that are imported into the country. And I think, well, it's another form of tax if it gets too out of hand.
Yeah, 100% sounds insane.
And that's a lot of countries in the world are like that.
Yeah.
A lot of countries. Well, it's not unique just to Colombia.
I think that argument that you just mentioned, I watched our Commerce Secretary make that argument, Howard Lutnick. He was on Pompliano's podcast, and he made the argument that, hey, like after World War II, we didn't want to, we didn't want to like make the same mistake of World War I. So what we did was the Marshall Plan, all this stuff, we kind of wanted these areas to rebuild, and we allowed them to rebuild their domestic capacity. We said, hey, put tariffs on our stuff. It reminds me of the South and before the Civil War started, after the War of 1812. I could be getting that war. It might be a different war, but I think it is the War of 1812.
I think that's when we burned the White House.
Yeah, you bastards, yeah.
You guys tried to invade and you lost. 9 times.
But
it's cold in Canada. You're off the hook. But
yeah, something along those lines. I don't remember all the details. That happened too long ago. But what I do know is that at that time, I think the British were funding you guys or whatever. I don't know all the specifics, but I know that
Canada was a colony.
Yeah, we didn't have the domestic capacity.
Yeah,
and we were already mad at the Brits. So you guys were a colony, and there was drama. But like we would buy a lot of stuff from you guys, and like when the war came, like you guys cut us off because you're fighting a war against us, right? So it was kind of like, hey, we don't have any domestic capacity here to make our own shit in a war, which is a huge national security risk.
Which is the scenario
Yeah.
the United States is in right now.
It's
As we
very
saw during
similar,
COVID
right?
with
Yeah.
medicine.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
everybody learned
That's the point.
all medicine is offshore.
Yeah,
That's ridiculous.
That's
crazy.
And this is the argument that I'm making, is saying like,
Yeah.
hey, we know this is a tax, but there's a national security element at play here.
Yeah.
So there should be some level of that. I don't what that level is. I'm not sure, but whatever the level is, it needs to make sense so we have domestic capacity. Need to play with that lever to make sure that maybe we still get 80% of it from overseas and other places, but there should be some kind of subsidization here for national security purposes, that we can make this and supply our citizens with it in a time of war to defend ourselves. So that is a thing that the government can do that I think actually makes sense. It fits with their role. It's limited in nature, but it's a security guarantee, right?
What do you think about the tariffs on Canada? Since you're talking to a Canadian.
Yeah. You again, I'm interested to hear your input on this, but I think we could go down. You know what? Let's save this for 1 second. I want to go down another rabbit hole first.
Okay, go.
So let me finish what I was thinking here, and then we can go down that rabbit hole, because it is interesting that Trump is wielding this as a tool for allies, enemies, friends, foes alike, for everybody. Yeah. He just wants to make deals, it seems. But I watched this interview with Howard Lutnick and Pompliano, and Howard Lutnick made this point about, hey, these tariffs that we had allowed them to have from like World War II, like so they could rebuild their domestic economies, where it's 80 years ago and they still have 100% tariffs. Germany or all these countries, they still have 100% tariffs on our goods. We're allies. Why are they doing that? Like they're crushing our domestic industry as well. So I think that, to me, like a light bulb went off in my head and it kind of clicked. It was like, okay, well, yeah, obviously the best state for the world, if you're like an academic and you look at, free markets and say, yeah, nobody has any tariffs, we have completely free trade, like that is the default state that makes perfect sense. But where we are now is, if Trump can, right now they have 100% tariff on our goods, and we have no tariff on their goods. If we can threaten them with a tariff, which causes them to say, okay, yeah, you're right, we're taking advantage, we reduce our tariff by 80%, and then we don't even put a tariff. I think that's a win-win for both sides. I mean, maybe not for them, because they, maybe it affects their domestic economy a little bit, but it rebalances the relationship. But I think as a negotiating tool, it's an interesting card to play. It's an interesting weapon. But I think it should be thought through logically with game theory. Think it through, So that's why the idea of reciprocity, I think, is a good, fair. Most people will say, hey, that's kind of reasonable, right? And maybe you do come to that some base level where each country's like, instead of them putting 100% on us and we put a 0% on them, maybe the base level is 20% here and 20% here. That way we each have some domestic protection, so we have some industry, and then everybody wins in the long run, because 20 plus 20 equals 40% tariff, but 100% is 100%. So you've dropped that cost by 60% for the market, right? So I think that maybe that's the game theoretical play out of the situation that benefits everybody. Again, I'm kind of just speaking off the cuff here, just kind of what I've been thinking, what I've been hearing. But that's kind of my thought on that. But yeah, let's dive into why you think.
Well, I want to hear what you think as an American.
Yeah. My thoughts are, I really understand the Mexico situation. So like, I'll start there. Like, hey, like, if you look at those border charts of like what happened, I mean, it was literally the Biden administration. This was a planned invasion to create this app to fly millions of people through. If you just look at the chart of like the people crossing the border, the immigrants coming in, you just see this. The second Biden's in, they canceled all the executive orders that Trump had in place, right? Which is kind of the downfall of executive orders and why you should have legislation passed.
That's right.
But you just watch this number just like skyrocket of like just people coming across, and now we're finding out they were taking our taxpayer dollars, funneling hundreds of millions to NGOs and different Catholic charities or whatever, and then literally using that money to bring all these millions of people across our border on the taxpayer dime. They're still doing it now. I mean, they're still paying to house aliens in hotels and all this stuff, all of the taxpayer expense. Not to mention the effects on schools, on hospitals, on the local systems of people that live there.
The price of real estate.
All these things. I mean, just crushing communities, right? Local, small communities. And I'm not anti-immigration at all. I think, there should be an easier, better process for people that want to come to, America, right? But like, it shouldn't be funded by the U.S. taxpayer. It should be, hey, I saved up for 6 months and saved my life savings or whatever, and I'm making this trip like people did back in the day when they went through Ellis Island. Like, hey, I took the initiative to fund this myself, to do this. I did whatever I had to do to get there. And then when I got there, I didn't just get a fucking handout from the U.S. government and the taxpayers that are there. I had to bust my ass and work. I lived in a really shitty situation, and maybe I lived with 4 people in a room until we could afford to get a job to do, like, you know what I mean? Like what happened back in the day, right? Like that's kind of like the American dream. You had a chance, right?
Hey, I've got something queued up here. If you want to finish your sentence, go ahead.
Yeah, like, so I understand why with all that's been happening. I understand why Trump is levying threats, because he was elected with a mandate to stop this invasion that's occurring. That was a planned invasion. That was actually, it wasn't like they just left the border open. No, they took taxpayer money and funded this invasion.
And also, my assistant lives in Arizona and is very well connected in political circles. And she's, Mexican heritage, although she's American. And she and other people noticed over the past few years, very few, if any, of those people crossing the border speak Spanish.
That's another interesting component.
They speak Urdu, and they speak Arabic, or they speak Farsi. That's what's been coming into the country.
There's
some Nigerian, some Somali,
for sure,
but predominantly those languages. So that is a massive national security threat. And I think the worst part about it, it's like, I love Mexico. I love Mexican culture. Spent a lot of time there. I don't like how Mexican culture, I guess, gets smeared by this stuff that has nothing to do with Mexico. People are coming. When I was crossing the border into Canada, into the United States in December, I crossed. I have a journalism visa because I'm working for a publication right now, and the border cross agent looked at me and asked me, asked me some questions, and I explained, and he said, "Oh, we need some good journalists." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Things are really crazy." I'm like, "Okay, this guy wants to talk." The guy's Latino. And
this was the Canadian border crossing into America?
Yeah, it was at the airport. It was a U.S. border agent.
Ah, okay, gotcha.
And he wanted to talk for some reason, and he said, "Yeah, I was just at the U.S. border on the south until 2 months ago. It's crazy what's going on there. So we need journalists to tell the story." And I said, "Yeah, I'm actually going to Florida. I was speaking at an organization on the other side of Florida called Citizens for National Security. Shout out to them. Very good people concerned about this stuff." And I said, "Let me guess, the people that you saw don't speak Spanish." I said to him, "Ellos no hablan español." And he said, "Yeah, no, they speak." I said, "Let me guess, Arabic, Farsi?" He said, "Yep, that's exactly what's going on there." So it was it was disconcerting that the border agent was completely aware and open. He said, we talked about some other stuff. It was only 2 minutes we were talking, but everybody knows what's going on. Yet we get the gaslighting from the radical left that everybody's a victim. All cultures are equal.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Captain Picard. There are 4 lights. No, you're not seeing what you're seeing, sort of thing. And that's their strategy. And we just don't have enough of it. Anyways.
Wow. That's wild. I know I saw a lot of different cultures and, military age males coming across the border. Chinese, all sorts of stuff. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of, even Springfield, there was I think they took a bunch of Haitians and just dropped them there. They didn't speak English, just boom, in the middle of Springfield, Illinois. So there was that whole situation.
Yeah, and there was an interview I was watching. I can't remember now. It was a few weeks ago now. I think it was either in the UK or in Canada, in America. I can't remember. I think it might have been the UK. The guy, it was because he referred to the village. He was offered something like $59 million for his hotel. He had big, has a hotel chain. It had a big hotel, like the primary hotel in some village somewhere there. And he was offered $59 million for 1 year payment for the government to house illegal migrants.
Wow.
And all staff they would pay for all the staff, would pay for everything. And
his taxpayers paying for this.
That's right.
Taxpayers are
it's FEMA funds
on the hook for this.
And he said he wouldn't, he said he told them no.
Wow.
And he said the reason he told them no is because it's kind of a small town. It would have destroyed the town economically.
Wow.
It would driven, it would. He went through all the negative impacts of how that would destroy a community, because now you have all these people who are displaced who cause crime to go up. And it would be, he said, it'd be great for me.
Yeah, it would be great for him.
My hotel, I get
I can't
59.
believe he's
I
saying
don't have
no.
to worry about it.
Yeah.
He said, but what's going to happen to my business in the future when it destroys the local economy around me? It was a tourist haven. There becomes security risks that would affect the tourism industry. Like, he walked through all that. He says,
Yeah.
I said no.
Wow. But
How
most
many
people,
couldn't say no?
most people wouldn't.
That's right.
I mean, there's other ways to think about it. I mean, he thought through all the second and third order effects, but most people are like, I get a bunch of money. I know I can keep myself in business. I'm barely getting by. I've got a bunch of staff who now are going to get paid. They have families. So like,
That's
that's a lot of respect for him for making
That's
that
right. I'll see if I
decision.
can find that link.
Whether
in
I
a
agree with it
second.
or not, it's a tough one to make, and he really thought it through.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow, that's crazy.
All right, Paul's going to make fun of Canada now.
Paul, let's make fun of Canada.
Well, before I do that, I just wanted to say, Mexico is not quite innocent here. They
That's a good point.
are allowing this
That's
active
exactly
flow of migrants.
I was
and
thinking
they're
the same
getting,
thing.
Kickback. And we saw the tariff threat instantly change that dynamic.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that showed that all along they could have
Yeah.
shut it down.
Of course.
And that is going to have severe consequences, right? There's going to be repercussions. But that being said, the tariff war with Canada is interesting because, they are supplying us for certain materials and energy, right?
Same thing
certain,
with Mexico. too.
materials that,
Yeah.
Block
yeah,
as
but
well.
apparently it's only like 4% of our GDP that's reliant on them. So I'm going to play this video. I haven't seen it myself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
go
mean, they rely on, both these countries rely on us a lot more. They sell all their goods into our
the
market.
world
So
does.
we've got a lot more leverage when it comes to the
Remember, the
relationship.
United States is the largest economy in human history. The
Yeah.
world is dependent upon the United
Exactly.
States, right?
Exactly.
So why is Trump not backing down? Just listen to this. In 2023, Canada sent 76% of all of their exports to the United States. That accounts for roughly 19% of their entire GDP. In 2024, Mexico sent 78% of all of their exports to the United States. That makes up 37% of their entire GDP. But for America, their exports to both countries combined only make up roughly 2.7% of their entire GDP. So simply put, even if they do retaliate, getting into a tariff war with the United States would hit Canada and Mexico much harder. Trump knows this, and he's using it. So why is Trump not back?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly the point we just talked about. I mean,
I think that video is deceptive because 2% of the U.S. GDP, would that not equate to approximately 76% of the Canadian GDP? I mean, the country's 12 times the size.
Of course, yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I think to show how stupid Canada is, our governance. We were, people on the right, on the conservative side, for many years were pushing, we need an east-west pipeline that would allow us to export our oil around the world. If you from BC into the Pacific Rim, and from the Maritimes over to Europe and Middle East, Africa, whatever. And that was quashed because of lobbying from American companies. Didn't want Canada to be independent, so we would be self-sufficient, and our idiot politicians went through it.
Yeah.
Went for it, and now Canada is not completely, but is way more dependent upon the United States, and that's what's given Trump the tool. Like another example, the Keystone Pipeline, that was essentially, the company I believe was nationalized by Trudeau, and that's why it was canceled on the Canadian side. That was Warren Buffett that was lobbying millions of dollars to prevent that from happening. Why? What does Warren Buffett own? Railway lines.
Yeah.
He doesn't want oil transported through a pipeline. So it's a lot more complex than just, good and bad. There's special interests on all sides.
Of course.
And that's what makes all of this complex.
So why do you think that Trump is doing this with Mexico and also with Canada? Do you think it has to do with the immigration crisis or fentanyl?
National security.
National security.
100% national security.
That's a broad
Canada has become
question.
a national security threat to the United States.
Can you unpack that?
Yeah, Canada is the #1 country in the world for laundering money for terrorism.
Wow.
Yeah. When Trudeau was elected, one of the very first things he did was he completely laxed the laws and regulations around NGOs.
Mm-hmm.
And when the Morsi government fell, hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions of dollars, I mean, I've heard all sorts of numbers, who knows what it was, came from Egypt into Canada. And that's what's funding all these jihadi groups that are, blocking the street. They're doing the street prayers like they did in France, or they do in France, which, by the way, is illegal in every Islamic country.
What do you mean? Why is it illegal?
Because praying is for the mosques. So
Okay.
if you're in Saudi Arabia and you get a mass of people who start praying in the street, they will beat your ass and drag you off to jail because it's
disrespecting. Okay.
It's a sign of extremism.
Oh, really?
Yes. And that's what we have in England. That's what we have in France and Greece as these.
Or we have freedom. We have, we're.
Yes.
The West has free speech, right? We have free.
They do. So what happens to Christians when they go pray on the street? They
depends where you at. Are you in the U.S.? You should be okay. If you're in Canada,
UK,
if you're in the UK now,
exactly.
You're in big trouble. That's some crazy shit happening in the UK.
Yeah. So which is what's starting to happen now.
We could talk about that too a little bit because I'm curious to hear your take on the Trump and the Keir Starmer thing, and they seem like they got along pretty well.
Well, listen, Trump's getting along with anyone who's going to do a deal with him.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Right?
Yeah.
But so anyways, that we've now gone through 10 years of this massive money laundering from Muslim Brotherhood proxies who've set up all over the country. And they're not new. I mean, they started in the 80s, but it really took off during the Trudeau administration, or the Trudeau government, we would call it there. And the United States knows what's going on. One of my last article, I think that was in Substack, is titled "A Caliphate Forming on the U.S. Northern Border. How will Trump react?" Everybody knows what's going on. Everybody in government knows what's going on in law enforcement and security. But, we're supposed to, remember, Picard, there are 4 lights. You're supposed to pretend it's not happening. And I think this is why so many people were so happy when Trump got elected. This is not going to be ignored anymore. And I think this is Trump, stepping on Canada's throat and saying, you get your security issues under control, or we're going to control you. It's one or the other.
So this is the first time I'm hearing this narrative. I mean, when I've talked to you, I haven't heard this before. It was the mainstream thing is it's just about the fentanyl that's making its way. That's what everybody thinks. So that's an interesting, very interesting tidbits and
like, for example, we have Fort McMurray is a rural town. That's Canada's oil industry, basically. That's in Alberta. It's in very rural Alberta. And what happens in Fort McMurray has been happening for several years now is the drug trade in Fort McMurray, that's your fentanyl, that is controlled by Somali gangs. And as we're getting waves of migrants coming into Canada from all over the Middle East and North Africa. If you're Somali and you end up in Toronto or Ottawa or Montreal, whatever, there you go to the local Somali community, and you're a young kid. You want a Bugatti. You want to you want to make it in the world.
Yeah.
You're finally in the Western world, sort of thing. So you'll eventually meet somebody if you're the right age. You'll meet somebody who'll tell you, well, we got something for you. If you want to, be the big dog, you want to make money, and, we're going to bring you to Fort McMurray and you're going to work for us. And we're going to hold your money. You're going to make lots of money. We'll save it to you. And when you're done, when you want to move back here, we'll pay you your money. And then you can come back and then start building your life, whatever. So they entrap these kids who are 16, 17, 18 years old. They go to Fort McMurray. They start dealing drugs, distributing, smuggling. That's why you see so many people who are economic migrants that are driving trucks in Canada. And when they finally ask for payment, they've made X number of dollars. Yeah, we'll pay you. Eventually, when they ask for it, they kill them.
Wow.
And they leave them in a ditch on the side of the highway.
Oh, my God.
So it's their own communities doing it to them.
Jesus Christ.
During the Syrian migration problem, there was, I know this went through the policing structure, what they found was families would be coming, most of them not from Syria, but, all over the Middle East, Syria, Lebanon, whatever. They come to Canada. The families would be given $14,000 to come to Canada by the Canadian government.
By the taxpayers.
That's right.
Yeah.
Taxpayer money, $14,000 per family. They would come. They would meet with the
How do
local.
you guys? I mean, again, like this makes me want to literally
Oh, if you thought
like,
we
rise up and go.
if
to,
you
like,
if you thought you
go to
printed
have
money,
a civil war.
yeah,
Like, this-
well,
like
that's
hearing that, like I'm paying to like fund tens of thousands of dollars to bring people from other parts of the world. I mean, it just infuriates me. How does it not infuriate?
people don't
People
know.
just don't understand.
People don't know this is happening.
Yeah.
So the family would be given $14,000, and then they would be told they would go see their local community leader, the local imam,
Mhm.
usually Muslim Brotherhood,
Uh-huh.
and they're told by the imam, okay, of the 14,000, you have to give $8,000 to the mosque and to the imam, and $3,000 to our lawyer who's doing all your paperwork.
Wow.
And then he'll get you a job, which ends up just basically being slave labor. So basically labor trafficking their own people.
Mm-hmm.
That's been known in the government now for 5 years.
Wow.
Done nothing about it. So that's the state of Canada. And you see this pattern happening all over the world, in Sweden, all over Europe. Like this is nothing new. And all our lawmakers who are just bureaucrats, they let it go on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Elon was on Rogan yesterday, and he made a good point saying that the real reason this is going on is to establish a uniparty, right? They're essentially importing voters,
Mhm.
and they're fast tracking them to citizenship through these NGO programs. And what they want is a uniparty blue, dominance. And that's essentially a socialist top-down state. These people don't know their constitutional rights. You're essentially back to masters and serfs.
I think it's on the right track, but it's a little more complex. Elon's new to politics,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see him learning the process. In my experience, migrants don't vote. They avoid the government because they come from countries where the government will kill you if you talk to a police officer the wrong way or whatever.
Yeah.
But what they do want is those ballots.
Exactly. Bingo. You got it, brother.
Yeah. It's the ballots they want. But I laugh when I hear Americans complain about a uniparty. I'm like, oh no, you don't know what a uniparty is. Like we have.
I mean, this is why they're fighting so hard for not have voter ID and all this stuff. I mean, saying it's racist,
which is crazy because where
total insanity.
You know where you need voter ID?
Yeah,
Canada.
Yeah, everywhere.
Canada, racist Canada. You cannot vote without a driver's license or voter ID. You have to show it every time you go in to vote. You show them their ID.
Like, there's some common sense in Canada. That's insane.
Yeah, it's always been the case. And we don't, at least in national elections, we don't have machines.
That's genius.
It's paper ballot, paper and pencil.
You watch these entire countries count with paper ballots in one day, get it done. It's like...
Yeah, the way we rig our elections is in the nomination process, or you call them primaries.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all machines, and those are all rigged. Because in Canada, unlike in America...
It's the illusion of choice then.
That's right.
It's the
so
illusion of
they
choice.
get their candidate in, and then, okay, we have paper ballots.
Here, you can pick Vladimir or Vladimir. Who do you want?
Exactly.
That's classic.
Since you're from Canada, there's an ongoing theory that Trudeau is a son of Castro.
We're going down the conspiracy rabbit hole.
I knew Paul was going to take us there.
Some of these photos, it's pretty bad. So what is your take on the situation as a Canadian?
I would love to have a DNA swab.
Oh.
And I've asked people to try to get one.
Really?
It's just locked down.
Wow.
That maybe after he's done.
Fidelito, is that what you call him? Little Fidel?
Well, I don't call him that. No. When I went back to Colombia after the trucking convoy, the people who used to say he was great now started calling him Carra Negra Fidelito, right?
Like Little Fidel.
I just thought that was funny. But listen, the timing lines up, but who knows? I'd like to see. I'd like to get a DNA swab. I'm not ruling it out. We'll put it that way.
Let me ask you about the whole Trump Keir Starmer thing. What do you think that's going on over in the UK? I know. Dominic Frisby probably has a really interesting take on this because we were talking about it a little bit. But when we talked about this concept, I actually watched Keir Starmer's speech, and I was shocked by how he misunderstood history and what he said in his speech. He actually said that you watched the whole Zelensky-Trump thing. I watched the whole like the Keir Starmer-Trump thing. And I watched his speech, and he said, Great Britain won the peace. And I thought to myself, I said, no, that was actually not what happened. The other countries that lost the war won the peace because they didn't get stepped on like the World War I countries. We actually forgave loans, did the Marshall Plan, did all this stuff for them. And the countries that actually lost the peace, you actually lost the peace. You're actually, to this day, or very recently, you guys just got done paying your war debt to the United States from World War II. So you guys actually lost the peace. But he's like, we won the peace. Was like fundamentally misunderstands
What do
history.
you mean? I'm not following.
So have you ever heard that expression, won the peace, before? I learned
No.
it from Dominic. I hadn't heard it before. But basically the idea of winning the peace, it's why they say that like Japan and Germany, even though they lost the war, they won the peace. What that means is essentially after World War I, we made them pay for everything. All the winning countries made them. They basically put the boot on that economy. But we learned after the Treaty of Versailles, we learned our lesson from that. So we didn't do that the second time around, almost to the opposite effect, where we said, hey, like, we're going to help you rebuild. We're going to do all this stuff. We're going to forgive your debts. Well, the UK actually paid their war debts. They just got done paying that. Whereas like we wrote off the debts of the other countries decades ago.
Okay.
So it's the expression won the peace was actually, and this is what I was taught by Dominic. He said that Japan and Germany actually won the peace, even though they lost the war. They won the peace because they didn't have to pay for everything, and it didn't occur how normal wars occur, where the loser ends up getting totally exploited. They were actually brought back into the. So the expression won that would be the expression won the peace, and what Starmer said in his speech was that the Great Britain won the peace, but they actually. They didn't. They actually had to pay for a lot more of it.
I'd have to watch the interview with
Yeah.
Dominic, so I didn't watch it to get a better understanding of it.
We haven't really. I think it's part of our Daylight Robbery series. We kind of talk about it when we go through the different world wars. So we haven't released that fully yet, but
Yeah.
it'll be dripped out here.
So I'd have to watch it to get a better understanding of the framing. But I think, look, the World War II was a very difficult part in
No doubt.
human history.
No doubt.
And I think we look at World War I as something that could have been avoided way more easily than World War II was. And, this is where I get off the isolationist train because sometimes there's just really bad people in the world that get a hold of power and cause chaos, and somebody needs to step in and deal with it. And there was a coalition around the world that came to England's defense. And God forbid if Nazi Germany, you talk about totalitarian system.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
If they had won that war. So I think that was, an important sacrifice that was given by England, the United States, Canada, a lot of troops there. And I think they had the most kills per person. Canada always brags about that. But I get very concerned about the increased distortion around World War II. Sometimes the the mainstream narrative, it's not always wrong. Sometimes it's right. You got to call balls and strikes on all sides.
I was more so just talking about the economic impact of why that phrase was created. I guess that's what I learned was that when you said that Germany and Japan won the peace, it means that like. They didn't get historically after war. You have to pay for the cost. The loser pays for everything and gets their country. That wealth gets expropriated and goes to the victors. So the fact by me saying they won the peace, they lost the war, but they didn't get economically fully exploited as was the historical norm.
Well,
so that's where that expression comes from.
From what I understand, wasn't Japan given extensive loans?
That's what I'm
they
saying.
Had to pay off over time.
That's what I'm saying, though. But
they paid them off.
I don't think they paid them all off. I think a lot of it got written off.
I believe. That I don't know.
Yeah, that's what Dominic said. The UK actually paid off all their loans finally after so many years.
Well, the UK also just recently paid off all their debts around slavery. which is, crazy. The fact
Yeah.
that, I get really annoyed and frustrated when people denigrate the contribution of um, the British Empire. People complain about human rights. That comes from the British Empire. Now, empires are not perfect.
Mhm.
But of all the empires, like, we're just into this age
Yeah.
of national states. But for thousands of years, dating back to the Sumerians and the Akkadians and Mesopotamia, human civilization was governed by empires and kingdoms and whatever. And it was really the final great empire that gave us human rights. And one of the things that they did is they ended slavery around the globe, and they paid reparations for that slavery. And they just finished paying off that debt like 3 years ago or
Oh, wow.
4 years ago.
How do you feel about slavery? Somebody said the other day that there are more slaves today that ever existed in the past.
In Libya.
Yeah.
Yeah, the slave trade in Libya right now is larger than the entire history of slavery of the United States.
That is just
and
crazy
all
to me.
the lefties want to ignore it because, I don't know, was it brown people? Is that the problem? We can't talk about slavery when they're cutting people's genitals off and selling them.
Jesus.
Like, Libya is an ISIS state. People don't understand. That's what was created in the vacuum after the removal of Gaddafi, who himself was also a nightmare.
Yeah.
But that's also
the devil of the devil you know is often better than the devil you don't. So
Yeah, and
learned
this-
watching all these geopolitical situations play out over time.
This is why I try to tell
It's like
people.
a Putin situation. Like,
Yeah.
the devil you know
And
is
this is
often
why
better than the devil you don't.
when we talked about Zelensky again, I'm not agreeing with the point that I'm making, but people in the West, we often, because we're so dominant, are putting our philosophical framing on other cultures around the world, while we also try to say all cultures are not equal and they're different. Well, if all cultures are not equal and cultures are different, and there's good ones and there's bad ones, then we also need to understand what are the failings and the differentiators of those other cultures. And one of them is there are certain cultures that are just authoritarian by nature. And you see that throughout, not all of the Middle East, but parts of the Middle East where you have dictatorship rule, because, well, that's really the philosophical underpinning of the religion that they abide by.
Yeah.
Right? That they have,
There's kings and all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
No, but you have, they all, Islam means to serve. You're a servant. So they're all servants of Allah through Muhammad, right? Or all servants of Muhammad, Muhammad the prophet, whatever. We're going to get into it. But the point is that framing of the world is completely antithetical to Western Enlightenment values, which have built the philosophical framing of the world we live in. Well, we got to respect the fact that they think different than us. Imam Tawhidi famously says, people who tell you, and this is an imam, people who tell you Islam is peace, they are lying to you. I am an imam. Your Christianity is built on peace and forgiveness, which is great. It's probably its biggest strength and sometimes a weakness. But
I had discussed this
not.
with somebody before who was religious, and they were Muslim, and they told me, look at Muhammad's last speech, like the Sermon on the Mount, where he kind of had this last speech. I think it was one of his last speeches where he said, and he showed me this, and it kind of said, like, it was this message of like, hey, don't oppress your Christian neighbors, your Jewish neighbors. It was kind of like this message of peace. Is that, have you gone down that rabbit hole? Have you looked at that?
No, everything I know about the Quran and the hadiths, especially the Bukhari hadiths, which are the ones that motivate Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS.
I mean, you could make the same argument for, like, if you look at the Bible and you just take some of the parts of the Old Testament and say, hey, this is...
We can quote mine things from, like...
Yeah. I guess my question is, what is the actual truth at the end? Like, what was... Obviously, the New Testament, like, a lot of shit in the Old Testament, I'm like, this is insane, right? You read some of this stuff, and me personally, like, this is crazy behavior. Like, what is it? Like, there's all sorts of stuff, but... Like, when you get to the New Testament, it's like this message of, like, peace and love and all this stuff. And, like, that really resonates with most people, right? Whereas if they actually read some stuff in the Old Testament, it might not resonate with you if you're a free thinker. That's how I feel. That's the conclusion I came to. Paul, can you look up the Sermon on the Mount, Muhammad's last speeches?
I'll give you...
I'm just curious.
I'll give you an example. One of the things that's often propagandized to people in the West there is that quote that says the Islamists always use this as a good indicator that you're dealing with an Islamist when they will quote to you and says, it says in the Quran, if you kill one person, it's as though you've killed all mankind. But you know what they forget? They forget the part that gives its context before and after. That is not a quote from the Quran. That is a quote from the Talmud. And the context of it, I'll paraphrase it. It says, when you kill one man, it's as though you killed all of mankind, is what God said to the Jews. But they didn't listen. Therefore, we must kill them wherever we find them. They forget that part. So they're quoting a part that's not actually Quranic, it's actually Talmudic.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of games that goes on with quote mining as people are trying to promulgate these alien values into Western society, and people are just not well versed in it.
Here it is, the Muhammad's last speech. Scroll down the farewell sermon, I believe. I guess he addressed over 100,000 Muslims. He said, all mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab has any superiority over an Arab. Also, a white has no superiority over a black, nor a black has any superiority over white, except by piety and good action. I guess he emphasized, let's see here, find it. Let's see here. He emphasis on the sanctity of life, property, and honor, the prohibition of usury, and the rights of women, urging men to treat them kindly. Let's see. Muhammad declared no prophet would come after him. Of course, he said that. Leaving the Quran and his Sunnah as eternal guides. This day I have perfected. I believe if you look at the actual text of the speech, he basically had said that. Can you ask for context about different, like Christianity? Ask about what he said about Christians and about Jews in that last
the people of the book
farewell
is
sermon.
how it's explained. That's what it says about the people of the book.
Yeah, something like that. So his last farewell. He said, you're right. The people of the book, a Quranic term referring to communities with revealed scriptures, primarily Jews and Christians. I'll focus on the farewell sermon, Muhammad's last speech. Let's see here. He said, trying to find there was a quote, because I had looked through this at one point. I had read it, and it had said something like, treat Muhammad saying, whoever harms a dhimmi harms me, underscores protections for Jews and Christians under Muslim rule, a principle consistent with the sermon's ethos. He also says the best of you are those who are best to the people of the book, indicating a call for respectful treatment, though this is not directly from the sermon. So there is some element of like, let's take care of everybody. What are your thoughts on that?
It's very important to understand, Robert Spencer has been doing work on this for 20 years, kind of outlines a lot of it, to understand that the Quran is not a book that's in sequence. So Muhammad had moved from, was it Mecca to Medina or Medina to Mecca? I can't remember the order, but began as a peace activist, but unfortunately did not grow his following beyond 100 or 150 people. And then he went to, I think from Mecca to Medina, he tried to, proselytize to the people that are there. He was rejected. That was a center of Judaism at that point, was a very influential Jewish community. And when he was rejected, he was said to have a fit of rage, and his religion would be more pious. And the way it was more pious was Jews, on their holiest day of the year, they pray 5 times a day on the holiest day of the year. So he said, we're going to pray 5 times a day, every day, to show that we're more pious.
Yeah.
And we're not going to fast for 1 day. We're going to fast for a month. And that's at the point where that following his movement he was trying to build became violent and returned to Medina and slaughtered everybody. And that became the beginning of the expansion to it. So it's a very difficult book to look at because it's non-sequential. It's all mixed together and from different parts different points in his life. I like how Gad Saad explains it, and I have a lot of sympathy for Western Muslims who want to integrate and don't want to participate with any of this, jihadi stuff.
Yeah.
They've tried to leave that, and doesn't mean they necessarily leave their faith, because we all kind of pick and choose what works for us. Most people just want to get along with their life and their families.
Yeah.
But I like how Gad Saad explains it. He says Gad grew up
he's so
in
funny,
Lebanon.
man. He's so fucking funny, that guy.
Yeah,
Every time I see one of his posts, he just kills me.
Yeah, but as he said, unfortunately, if you can look at the trajectory over time,
Mhm.
as a society becomes more Islamic over time, does it become more tolerant and inclusive and free, or does it become more totalitarian, oppressive, and violent? And unfortunately, we have 57 countries or 56 countries of which to derive the data from to show that overwhelmingly it's intolerant, because those societies become 99% conforming to that religion, convert or die, because the extremists always get a hold of it and use it as a tool. And that's why you saw the slaughtering of the Yazidis in Iraq with ISIS. Countries like Lebanon that were predominantly, most of the Middle East was predominantly Christian, but Lebanon in recent years was predominantly Christian, which has gone from something like 65% Christian to, I think now it's 30%. Egypt, which was a Christian nation, only has 10% Coptics left. And it's amazing that Christians in the West are ignoring this fact, that this is why you hear people say that the Christians are the ones who are being slaughtered and genocided, because over time, if you look at the numbers, that's exactly what's happening. But now you have Christians in the West that are steel manning the very extremists of a foreign religion and with alien values that are killing them.
Yeah. No, it's like that Stockholm syndrome. That's what I kind of think.
I think it's just fear. It's just fear to fight.
Yeah, I don't. It's, you watch it with these like transgender people that are with like the LGBT community, like supporting Hamas, like all the places, like you realize they would cut your fucking head off and like kill you, right? Like
they throw them off a building.
They just have no clue. They're just so ignorant. It's unbelievable.
It's that competition, who's the greatest victim, right? It's victimhood mentality.
Yeah, it's a celebration of victimhood, I guess.
Something I just can't wrap my head around with Muhammad is this idea that he married, a underage, like the Aisha, correct? 6 or 7 years old. How is that justifiable at any time in history?
Well,
and how, if you are a person, a prophet or whatever, how is it that you can rationalize that?
Well, if you look at Muslim culture or a lot of stuff that happened in Afghanistan, like there's a lot of that pedophilia occurring over there. I've watched a lot of Rogan episodes about it. I mean, that's
and this
people that went over there were very disturbed by
this. Becomes
that.
The intersection between wokeness and the extremists on the other side. That's how you get the red-green alliance, which is what's trying to destroy the West from the inside.
Yeah.
And I try to tell people, the Jews, they're irrelevant. They're a small population of 14 million people around the world with a tiny country, and that's
you can't just write it off that easy, brother.
You just did.
But
without pushback, you want my rebuttal?
No. I don't want no.
Go. So,
but
dodge that bullet.
Who's the most influential bloc in the United Nations? What's the most influential bloc in the United? Do you know?
You think the United States should be, but
it's the OIC. The OIC is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. That is the 56 Islamic nations that vote as a bloc with their UN ambassadors. And what international organization is promoting the woke agenda around the world to countries around the world? That would be the United Nations.
Yeah.
It is a tool to subvert the powers in the West. That's where wokeness comes from. And the communists go along with it as well, because they also have desires to weaken the West.
Yeah. I think that's a great analysis, and I sympathize with that point of view greatly. I guess what I was trying to get at with what I was showing here was that his last speech was kind of a message of like,
Yeah, but the thing is, we don't know that that's his last speech.
but isn't that what wasn't that what it's called, his last address before he died? I guess that was my understanding of it.
But because it was all periods of his life that were mixed together.
Well, they said he addressed 100,000 people. I mean, that wasn't early on when he
no,
only had
I know
followers. So.
I know, but it also may not have been the end. Like, there's a lot of
I'd have to look
ambiguity
at that.
we don't know.
Okay,
right?
I thought that they had.
But you can say in modern culture it's accepted as the
I thought
speech,
that was that's what I thought. I thought that was I didn't know there was a historical dispute about that being his last speech. I thought his historically that was kind of proven or accepted that was his last speech.
Yeah, which
that was kind of like the moderate. When I speak to moderate Muslims who are normal people,
which is why that's
share
important.
those beliefs, they say, look, here this is his last speech. Just like. The counter explanation is just like the Old Testament has all sorts of crazy things that I don't personally agree with or accept, or the New Testament is kind of like the last thing is like, hey, let's all come together, peace, truth, love, those kind of concepts, forgiveness, all of those things. That's what Jesus was, and that messaging, whether you believe it or not, all the stories, but like that is a powerful message that resonates with people, right? That people can accept and people can get behind. Just like I can get behind Muhammad's last speech, right? But I think you get in this point where, I mean, obviously that, like, you look at that, the wife, that's clearly pedophilia. I mean, but if you look at history, and it's crazy that I have to fucking steelman this because like he's fucking crazy but we see this here even in the U.S. with us getting rid of people that were historical figures, that you lived in a different time of morality. And like look at the ancient Greeks, that with pedophilia was like part of their culture. Like it was literally like normalized, I guess. Like
people have always been fucked up.
Yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, you and I, it's fucking disgusting, right? We think about it and it just makes me want to fucking kill somebody, right? It's like
I try not to even think about it. Honestly, like I hear people talking about I know it's there. I just want to live a normal life, and hopefully law enforcement or I don't know, bounty hunters will deal with that. It's so pathetic that we even have to talk about this now.
No doubt.
Because this was not a regular topic of conversation 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We didn't have to address this stuff, but it was
happening. It's always been happening
for sure.
It's.
I don't think it was happening at scale like it is now. Maybe
in the world,
know.
It's still happening at scale.
Yeah.
I mean, look at like I watched Rogan's podcast with some of these special forces guys, like, and like they went to Afghanistan and these Middle Eastern countries.
Afghanistan's crazy.
It's fucking just normalized like pedophilia. But even if you go back to the great like philosophers, like you look at ancient Greece, it's like that was normalized. That was part. I mean, you can put as the basis of Western culture and put it up on a fucking pedestal and say all this stuff about the Greek philosophers. But like pedophilia was like a normal part of their culture. Yeah. Like that was like encouraged. It was like it was what it was. Right?
Was it encouraged?
I think it was. I think it was considered like a mentor. It was like gay pedophilia. They would have a little boy. It's fucking disgusting. But that's reality. That's history. That's fact. Yeah. Right. So I mean, like you can discount it all you want, but that actually happened. It was part of the culture. Yeah. So as disgusting as it may seem, and that it is, it's fucking gross. Like you and me get a visceral reaction, angry reaction, just thinking about it, but it doesn't change the facts of history. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I agree.
It's just a crazy thing to think about, but yet here we are on a Saturday talking about this shit.
We got to find some positive topics. We got to end on like a positive note. What are some good things?
Yeah. I mean,
signs of hope for the future.
Let's see what Trump has to say to Keir Starmer here.
The positive thing is that it is now under scrutiny.
100%.
In Britain, they busted those gangs doing that, large scale.
Well, you're importing that from all these immigrants, and that's what's happening.
I produced a podcast 6 years ago, one of many that discussed the grooming gangs in 19 countries in the United Kingdom over 20 years. And thank God, I mean, this is where you give credit to Elon for allowing, because I used to deal with the censorship all the time.
Crazy.
And now, at least that he took over the platform, now people are
can wake the fuck up and see what's
they have to address it.
Yeah.
The government can't hide from it anymore, but it's just pathetic that that's become the state of the United Kingdom, which is, I don't know, I just frustrated by it.
Yeah,
you know?
no doubt about it. I mean, they're arresting people over, saying
Yeah.
bad words. And somebody gave me anxiety by retweeting a tweet, and they've got fucking literal pedophile
Yeah.
fucking gangs going on. I mean, it's like, you want to kill these fucking people.
Yeah.
I mean, what is wrong with these people?
The truth is their enemy.
Yeah. Let's
So
play
here's
this clip
this-
from Trump. Let's see what he said to push
Yeah,
back
I
on
haven't
this.
seen this, by the way.
It's just a little clip from the thing.
Between our two countries. That is why this is the greatest alliance for prosperity and security I think the world has ever seen. Whenever necessary, we absolutely backed each other up, and that's at the
Could you
core.
take on Russia by yourselves?
Well,
He was just busting his balls.
Yes.
That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else you got, Paul? Can you pull up the Scott Bessent, what he said about the economy? Let's close out on that. Let's get to a little happier topics here, or just like an interesting topic.
He said we're in a depression, right?
That's
No.
the optimistic.
Oh, let's see here, because I think it is an interesting concept to go over. Let's see here. No, go down. I think it's down. Right, I think it's right there. Yeah, go up. Not the one right above that one. Okay, here we go. Yeah. Open that clip up. Nope. That one, yeah. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was just questioned if we're in a recession. So let's see what he's, and I think it's important for a lot of people to understand. Play this real quick.
Torsten Slock from Apollo,
That's
somebody
8
you
minutes,
know,
never mind.
who came out with a note today saying,
But I guess what he's getting at here is, go up a little bit. So we're seeing the hangover from the excess spending in the Biden 4 years. In 6 to 12 months, it becomes Trump's economy. Translation, they want the market to crash soon. Well, what Scott Bessent knows here is that a lot of the financial wizardry and the games and the lies that were played to just push on the American, the economy is getting better, it's getting better. It was all bullshit. It was all government money printing, government spending, government hiring. There was literally no private economy. There was no real economy. So what Scott Bessent is trying to get at, and he actually needs this to happen, is they're trying to bring down the 10-year Treasury yields, right? They're trying to crush inflation so they can, have a foundation to build on. But I find this argument extremely credible. I don't know what your thoughts are, but, give them 6 to 12 months to work it out. It's probably going to be, sideways or short-term pain before they can crush that level of inflation.
I have a theory not based on any, our own meandering experiences, but not based on any charts or data. But my theory is we're actually in a GFC right now. We're right at the cusp of it. Nobody's realized it. And part of the benefit of, I think it's a benefit. I think this is what they're trying to do. I don't know how. I don't know the economic means that it would work out. But I think that's also another reason there's a push for all these tariffs. I think there's a strategy on their end that we're not going to do bailouts like we did last time.
Yeah.
We need to figure out another way
Systemically fix the
to
issue.
systemically fix the economy so the brunt that we feel of an economic crash is not as impactful as it was, and maybe it's more gradual, and maybe the tariff model is the way to do that. I don't know.
It's
just,
definitely part of the equation.
Yeah, I just get that sense that they know. Look, we've all been calling for an economic reset because what we've been doing is unsustainable for so long, and they know that. Everybody knows
Of course,
that.
yeah.
And I think they're trying to play the long game, and that's my sense of it. I can be completely wrong, but does that sound completely unreasonable?
No, it doesn't sound unreasonable at all. I mean, I think that's exactly what's at play here. Inflation needs to be crushed first, and I think that that's going to be short-term painful for the markets and for risk on assets, and I think that's what we're seeing.
And if you notice, he's trying all sorts of tools that have never been tried before: Bitcoin strategic reserve, tariffs, and I'm sure there's other things coming down the pipeline. That there's a basket of sweets we can use that maybe may hedge against further economic disaster. Maybe I'm giving them more credit, I don't know, than they deserve, or maybe I'm right. I don't know.
No, it's an interesting take. It's an interesting take.
Yeah.
Any other final thoughts before we close out here?
The weather's beautiful in Florida.
Hey man, come to the beach with me. I'm heading off to the beach.
Are you?
My best trucker attire to be with all the truckers. Oh, one last thing I did want to go over with you, and I, as a truck driver, and a thought before we close out. And I guess this is an interesting conversation to have. We didn't get a chance to have it with Todd and with Bitcoin Ben, but how do you foresee AI playing out when it comes to trucking? I mean, in my mind, that's like self-driving cars. I feel like trucking is an industry that is ripe for disruption on that front? Do you see those jobs going away? Do you see those jobs changing? How do you foresee that playing out?
I don't know. I think, I say this often, but I think our impression of the implications of AI, we do this with all new fundamental technology. It's another example of how humans overestimate change in the short term and underestimate change over the long term.
Yeah.
I don't think AI is going to be nearly as impactful as people think it is because I use it all the time.
Yeah.
Every day I use it, for small little tasks and, writing stuff and certain image stuff and the organizational process. Like I'm trying every possible tool. And it reminds me of my first computer when I was 3 years old. My dad got us our first family computer, and it was a PET emulator, Commodore PET emulator. And, this computer's going to change the world. Well, computing changed the world.
No doubt.
But it wasn't the PET emulator that did that. Like that was one of many steps forward. And I think it's the same thing with AI. I don't have any fear of it. Me and Stephen Hicks have talked about we're going to try to communicate all the positive aspects of AI and try to, stymie some of the concerns that people have. I don't have nearly as much the concerns that people have. In terms of trucking itself, I think you're going to see similar to what's happened in aviation. And this has been going on for a little bit. So you had kind of the old school truckers, which if that's the way trucking was, I would never would have gotten into it. Like probably can see I come from the white collar world. I got into trucking after, but I always respected and have friends who are blue collar as well. I like wrenching on my own cars and motorcycles and stuff like that. So I'm comfortable in both worlds. But I think you've seen trucking go from, you had your old school truckers to the systemization of modern trucking, and it's in that transition. And I've met several truckers that were former VPs of large companies, entrepreneurs who built big businesses, retired. My brothers like this, wanted something to do and wanted to see the country. They love driving and whatever, and they want to make money at the same time, but that's kind of secondary.
Yeah.
So you have those two, that transition from old school trucking, and similar to what happened in aviation. Aviation was the same way. It was all fly by the seat of the pants. And now you have modern aviation, which is rigidly structured, and that's why it's so safe. And in aviation, are there planes that fly themselves? No. Well, they could.
Yeah, there's still a pilot there.
But no one's ever going to tolerate that. There's always a pilot there to monitor the systems. And you can get into the different philosophies of Airbus versus Boeing, which is a good indicator of that. And I think you're going to see the same thing in trucking. I personally would love it. I'd probably stay in trucking longer. If I had a truck that was basically a robot, I could press a button when I get on the highway and it could drive and I can open up my laptop and do work. Oh my God, that would be brilliant. That'd be perfect. I'd love that.
Okay.
But I think that's where we're going to go over time. Maybe in the next 10 years, you'll have trucks where the driver brings it from the dock or from the yard to the highway. When he gets on the highway, they'll set of commands of the equivalent of autopilot.
Yeah, autopilot, self-driving.
And they'll monitor it, and that'll communicate with other trucks to kind of, make the traffic run more efficiently. And I think that's what we're going to see.
Okay.
But I think it's a long ways away.
Okay.
I don't think the world's going to change in a dime like we think it is.
I took Dominic in the Tesla. He was here last week, and he just it blew his fucking mind when he saw how good the auto driving was. He wrote a whole Substack article about it.
Oh, and I hate it. I hate it. My best friend here saved my life because he's got a Tesla at home, and my rental car. I go to the rental car company when I arrive, and they say, we don't have any gasoline cars. What the hell does that mean? So they gave me an electric car. I've never driven across the state of Florida, so I got to drive across the state of Florida in an electric car.
That Polestar. That's a cool little looking little car.
Yeah, so I've driven every Tesla. I think every model of Tesla. I hate the autopilot. I don't even like radar guard.
It's getting better. It gets better and better.
I spent you know, I spent a lot of time on racetracks
Mm-hmm.
and Cayuga and Mosport. I used to track my car regularly. Like I'm a car.
You like to
nut,
drive. Some
sort
people
of.
like to drive. I'm a guy who does
Yeah.
not like. I like to be driven. I like to relax. I like to do other things when I'm driving. I don't
No,
wanna
I
drive.
just got anxiety from it.
Really?
So
Yeah.
so Charlie got a Model S with I don't remember which level of autopilot it was. He's got an X right now. He had the S, and I drove. I just didn't like it. It's like I don't like being a passenger in a car either.
Mm.
And maybe that's just
That's
my
what
own
it.
personal
Yeah.
hang-up.
it's- I love being a passenger. I don't want to be a driver. So
But I'll tell you one
Yeah.
thing. Give me a supercharged V8 and a 6-speed any day. However, driving this little Polestar 2,
Mhm.
I love this car.
it is
I
fun to have the
really
kick
do.
when you have an electric car and you like I've had Teslas. So like when you actually just press it and just the instant feedback is something, you know.
Or just getting back at the house at night and plugging it in, and I'm
Yeah.
getting another just on a regular wall socket.
Yeah, you get
Gives me
5 miles an hour.
30 miles.
30 miles an
over a
hour.
night. No,
Oh,
for a
I
night.
got to say,
Yeah.
yeah. Tesla does about on a 110 regular wall outlet. And
Which
I
Tesla do you have?
I had a Model Y. I just got rid of it. I'm getting a Cybertruck.
Oh God! My God!
I'm into the futuristic aesthetic, so I like that. I'm a big fan.
It looks like I'm playing an '80s video game.
I fucking love it. I love it.
Yeah, let's each their own.
To each
yeah.
their own, right? But I
Yeah.
also have a bunch of earrings and fucking a little bit of red hair. So
Yeah, you know, I don't hate or love. I'm not a pickup truck guy.
Yeah.
You know, at all.
I'm not a truck guy either, really, but I think it's cool. I like the futurist. I like the avant-garde nature of it,
Okay,
which is
fair
I'm an
enough.
avant-garde kind of guy. So like when I see somebody challenging, the status quo, I'm a fucking rebel. I love it. So that
Yeah.
to me, that's like what it is, right?
Exactly.
But I mean, it is a great experience owning a Tesla. I'm a huge fan. There are downsides. There are certain things. I think the quality of the interior is lacking compared to
yeah, that's what I like about
nice
the Polestar.
other luxury cars.
Yeah.
But the technology is, and a lot of people don't get this, and that's why I'm an owner of Tesla stock. It's a technology company. You're buying the artificial intelligence, the giant brain that's doing the roads and the self-driving, and it's fascinating to me, and I love the tech in the car.
So I bought Tesla stock at $25.
Wow.
And I remember I had a stockbroker at that time, and I came at the car. When I say I love cars, I love
Mhm.
cars. I watch engineering programs. I like the business part. And
Mhm.
it's the reason I never got into the business, because never make your passion a business. I think it kind of ruins your life. But I remember calling my stockbroker and saying, this Tesla stock, this was before the Model S came out.
Mhm.
I said I want to buy it. It's like, no, I don't recommend it. I'm like, why don't you recommend it? He's like, oh, I don't like high flyers. I said, okay, great. I'm going to go to discount brokerage. Thanks. And I bought it $25. Now,
Mhm.
like an idiot,
Mhm.
I sold it at like $400 a share or something like
right.
that. But I was an early believer in where they're going with Tesla.
Mhm.
And it's, again, I'm a petrol head. I think this is what Jeremy Clarkson gets wrong. I think the market is going to be able to accommodate both.
Both, I think so too. Yeah.
There's some of us that in a perfect world, if I ended up, at some point in the future, I could see myself having both a gas car and an electric car, and they just serve
That's where I'm
different
at.
purposes. Yeah, it's perfect.
Twin turbo, fucking V12, DB11, which is an amazing experience, but
Yeah.
For everyday driving, like the electric car is really nice.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
exactly. So
technology and it's
yeah, totally.
I'm with you there, brother.
You know what? We'll have to do a podcast just on cars.
I don't know too much about cars, but I know what I like.
Right?
I know what I like. I know what I like.
Yeah.
I know what I like. I do know that. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, brother.
Likewise.
So thanks for joining me on a Saturday.
All right, brother. Appreciate it.